A fantastic fruit to grow, raspberries are high reward for really not very much work. Pruning them can seem confusing, but it's not once you understand a few things, and I'm going to break it down for you in a simple way. Pruning is necessary no matter which type you have, and doing it properly will give you the biggest berries, the sweetest berries, and the most berries possible. It really does make a difference. We're going to go over how we prune fall-bearing or ever-bearing and summer-bearing raspberries of all colors, and what to do if you don't know which type you have. I also have a quick note about how we train and trellis them, and I'm going to share the 11 different varieties we grow and which ones are my favorites. But before we get into the actual pruning, we have to talk about raspberry biology and the differences between fall and summer-bearing varieties and how they grow. This is something I didn't fully grasp for a long time, which is because I never heard anyone explain it in a clear and concise way. So the big picture here is that fall-bearing raspberries grow new canes from the ground up all summer long, and then they make fruit on those canes in the fall. One and done, super easy. They're sometimes called primo cane raspberries, primo meaning first or one, which makes sense. Now, summer-bearing or flora cane raspberries make berries on second-year canes. This means they have a 2-year cycle where the first year they grow canes but don't produce fruit, and then the second year is when they make fruit on those canes. And because they already put their energy into the canes last year, they're able to produce fruit earlier in the season, in the summer instead of fall. That's pretty simple and straightforward to understand, right? Well, here's where it gets a little bit more complicated. If you have fall-bearing raspberries and you do not cut them to the ground in early spring, they will produce both a summer and a fall crop, which is why fall-bearing raspberries also have the name of ever-bearing raspberries. I think this is what confuses a lot of people, and I hope that it's a little bit clearer for you. As far as what to prune raspberries with, there are a lot of different options, so use what you have. Our favorite tool for mowing down a big bed of old fall canes is a small electric chainsaw or kind of like a hedge trimmer. This uses the least amount of human energy and makes the work go pretty fast. Our next favorite option is Hedge shears. A little more work to operate, but you can cut down a lot of canes pretty quickly. This is a ratcheting lopper. We actually use this for the very thick, woody, and super pokey and stabby blackberry canes. It's slower, but it works for raspberries too. And finally, you can use a simple hand pruner, but this will require a little bit more bending and reaching. I will link all these tools in the video description below. We use all of them for many different jobs around the homestead, and we love them all. Most raspberries should be pruned while dormant, so anytime in the winter or in spring before they start growing new leaves. We always prune as soon as the snow melts and we can access the beds. It's one of the first spring tasks we like to check off our list. Fall-bearing raspberries. Now, if you're looking for simple and easy, fall-bearing raspberries are it. Pruning requires very little thought, which is my favorite kind of task. All you do is cut all of the canes all the way to the ground. That's it, no fuss. And it's the same for all colors from red to yellow to gold and black. And I know this feels drastic, but I promise that your fall-bearing raspberries will flourish if you prune them this way. Now, I've seen some people prune their raspberries but leave 6 inches to a foot of cane still standing. Don't do that. Cut them all the way to the ground as low as you can. Try to cut them level with the soil or sticking up like an inch or so. Like I mentioned before, if you don't prune fall-bearing raspberries, they'll become ever-bearing and produce in both the summer and the fall. They'll grow berries in summer on the old canes, but they'll also grow new canes and produce berries on those in the fall. This sounds like it would be great, doesn't it? But it's actually not. Each harvest will be smaller and the fall harvest will be delayed. You will by far get the best overall crop by growing them as a true fall berry by cutting the canes down every spring. Fall raspberries are my favorite. They're the best producing and the most delicious. They're much tastier than summer berries, and we grow 7 different varieties. The only downside to fall raspberries is that they don't produce until late summer, but they do produce berries from late summer until frost. Fall berries have fairly short and sturdy canes, but they will droop when they're heavy with ripe fruit, so we have fence posts at the end of the beds, and once the canes get tall enough, we simply string a rope between the posts and flop the canes over it to support the berries. It's cheap, it's easy, and it works pretty well to keep them off the ground. Summer bearing raspberries. Now, these aren't hard to prune, but they do require a little bit more thought. The goal here is to cut out all of the old canes that fruited last year, just leaving the new canes. So for this, you will need to be able to tell the difference between an old cane and a new one. And once you see them side by side, it should be fairly obvious. Old canes are often thicker and have dry-looking skin. These have grown and produced berries, and they won't produce again. They look old. New canes are usually brown and more supple with shiny skin, and they look in good condition. They look fresh. These are canes that grew last year and are ready to make fruit for this year. So once you've identified the old, haggard canes, go through and cut them out, and cut them as close to the ground as you can, just like we did on the fall berries. That's all you need to do for most summer reds and yellows, but if you have summer-bearing black raspberries, these take a little bit more work. In addition to cutting out the old canes, you'll also need to think about tying them up and tip pruning them because they grow a little bit wild and unruly. And if you don't tie them up, they'll flop on the ground and cause problems. We use a simple 2x4 and some twine to keep them gathered, which you can see here, it's nothing fancy. So to prune these types, we first have to untie the bundle from last year before we can cut out the old canes. Then we rebundle and retie them back up with only the new canes that are ready to fruit. A little more work, but still fairly simple. One more detail about summer blacks. I told you they were the most complicated. They often benefit from being tip pruned. We actually do this in the summer, but it looks just like this, only there are leaves. Sorry, I don't have a video of that, but when they're like 6 to 8 feet tall in late summer, we cut the tips to encourage branching and more fruit production the next year. What Carl is doing now in the spring is cutting off some of the winter damage on the tips. This looks like drier, shriveled, dead wood, and he's cutting it back to the healthy wood. Even though summer berries aren't quite as tasty in general as fall berries are, I do appreciate that they produce fruit earlier in the summer. Because we grow both types and a lot of different varieties between them, we have fresh berries for almost the entire summer. They produce from July to October or first frost, with a couple weeks break after the summer berries stop and before the fall berries begin. It's one of the highlights of my summer. So what if you don't know what type of raspberries you have and therefore don't know how you should prune them? Maybe you inherited your patch, or maybe you just didn't pay attention when you planted them. Well, if you have a keen eye, you may be able to tell. At least in our climate, summer-bearing varieties often come up from one central plant like this. See how they're more in clumps? Some varieties, this is more noticeable than others. Fall-bearing raspberries tend to come up just all over the place, randomly, and very thickly, like these here. A surefire way to know is to sacrifice part of your patch. Mark off and cut down a section of the plants all the way to the ground as if they were fall-bearing raspberries. If they grow canes but don't produce berries that year, this means they're summer-bearing. If they grow all summer and produce berries in the fall, that means they're fall-bearing, and then you'll know. And as far as what we do with the prunings, we just put them on our compost pile. If you're wondering about which varieties are best, I'm always a proponent of looking at the types available and getting what speaks to you and what works in your climate. But I will share my favorites. We have 11 different varieties, and just like apples or tomatoes, each one has their own flavor and personality, and I actually have a full review of every variety we grow on my website. I'll put a link to that in the video description. Starting with the fall-bearing types, my number one favorite variety is this one right here, which is Caroline. It's large, conical, and sturdy, so it doesn't crumble and fall apart easily, and I think it's the most flavorful and sweetest. It's the berry that I always reach for. For fall reds, we also have Jacqueline and Joan Jay, and they're both good varieties as well. And then there's Anne, a beautiful yellow raspberry. It's honey sweet but lacking true raspberry flavor. It's good and it's fun. I like having just a few of these around. Double Gold is the most gorgeous coral fluorescent pink glowing color with a lovely sweet, moderately raspberry-like taste. This isn't the best producer for me, but that's because it needs a little bit longer season than I can give it here, but I do really love this one. This black raspberry is called Niwat, and it's got a very deep, jammy black raspberry flavor. It's extremely productive, and I like it. It's a very nice berry. As far as the summer-bearing varieties, my top pick is called Royalty Purple. It's a purple red with an almost whitewashed cast to it. So incredibly stunning. For summer berries, these are very good. We have 2 summer blacks. Jewel is a smaller berry with brighter flavor, and Mac Black is a bigger berry with a more jammy flavor, and I like both. I'd love to know what varieties you have and how you like them. I'm always interested in learning about other varieties that I haven't tried. There, that is raspberry pruning and more. I hope this video helps you grow amazing raspberries and takes just a little bit of the mystery out of it. Just a reminder, I'm in Zone 4 Wisconsin, and berry growing might be a little bit different depending on where you live. As always, let me know if you have any questions, and if you found this video helpful, I would love it if you could give it a thumbs up. And make sure to subscribe to my channel so that you are the first to know whenever a new video is posted.